of Trinidad and Tobago. Good afternoon. As you all are aware, we took a decision as one of the responses to this pandemic in March, and I think it was the 23rd of March, if I remember correctly, to shut the borders to both our nationals and to non-nationals. We had shut the borders to non-nationals a couple of weeks before that, and we've been managing the process. So if I can start off first of all by giving the statistics and the numbers of exemptions that have been granted over the period of time, and in particular within the last period of time when the Prime Minister announced that we would be doing more to repatriate on a quicker momentum. The total number of exemptions granted to enter Trinidad and Tobago as at the 6th of October is 5,284. So 5,284 exemptions granted to enter Trinidad and Tobago as at the 6th of October. The total number of exemptions granted to leave Trinidad and Tobago as at that same date, the 6th of October, 7,208. The exemptions granted to enter Trinidad and Tobago from August 31st to October 6th, so really over the period of the last month, we've managed to increase that number to 1,952. So in the last month, we've granted 1,952 exemptions as at the 6th of October, and we continue to be granting. The number of exemptions granted of persons departing Trinidad and Tobago during that same period, the 31st of August to the 6th of October, 977. What we've seen, as I was just explaining to the Prime Minister, is we've seen an increase in the number of applications being made to come home. And I'd just like to take a little bit of time to explain, out of this number that I've given of 5,284 persons who've been granted exemptions to come home, what has been happening. You all would remember within recent, the current policy is persons coming back from high risk and medium risk countries are required to go into 7 days of state supervised or state quarantine, and then the next 7 days, provided they don't indicate positive via test or that they don't require to be hospitalized, they're then allowed to go home and complete their next 7 days of quarantine. So it's a 14-day period, the first 7 days in state quarantine facilities or state supervised facilities, and then the next 7 days at home. That continues for high risk and medium risk countries. There are just a handful of low risk countries that when you come in from those countries, if you haven't been in a high or medium risk country for 14 days before that, you can go straight home and quarantine at home. What has happened is, because of the recent spike in the numbers of cases, the facilities that were being used for state quarantine were then being utilized by the Ministry of Health for step-down facilities and to deal with our positive cases. Fortunately, we are now back in a position where those facilities are available to be used as state quarantine facilities. We've had the addition of UE St. Augustine campus. So we now have somewhere roughly a total of between 400 to 450 rooms available for us to utilize as state quarantine and state supervised quarantine facilities. What has happened since the Prime Minister announced that we were to repatriate on a quicker modality is we actually now have a fairly stable rotation taking place. Flights from the United States every 10 days, rotating between New York and Miami. We've also been running a number of flights through our state airline, Caribbean Airlines, from Barbados, where persons are making their way to Barbados and we're repatriating them back from Barbados. There have also been some flights from other countries like Jamaica and other countries where we've brought back persons. What we're now doing, fortunately that we now have more facilities, is we are speeding that process up even more. So in this coming week, on Tuesday, we have a flight from, I believe the Tuesday flight is from from New York. Wednesday, we have a flight from Toronto. Friday, we have a flight from Barbados, and we're going to put on, within that 10-day period, a shorter period, another flight from the US, because we have now reached a stage with these increasing facilities we can use for state quarantine that we can bring back persons a lot quicker. What I would like to also spell out is we have the list of when people made applications. Our priority is to get back those persons who, unfortunately, due to this global pandemic, found themselves stuck out all over the world from March of this year. The addition of these people that we're seeing now applying are a lot of persons who have dual citizenship, persons who are living away and now want to return to be domiciled in Trinidad and Tobago. They are not the priority. The priority is those who went out on short trips or expected to come back prior to March or around March and are still stuck. Unfortunately, those numbers have dwindled. We have the statistics, we have the information at national security, and they are the priority items, applying the same criteria, the old, the elderly, the sick, those with young children. But fortunately, we've seen that basket been reduced substantially. Now that we have these additional facilities, we will be able to grant more exemptions and also facilitate through the state airline from those jurisdictions that we've been able to send flights to bring persons back. So we expect this process to be speeded up. What I'd like the opportunity to just state, we are aware, because the information has been sent to me, that there are some mischief makers out there, and anyone who is telling persons that they have a way to facilitate a quicker grant of exemptions at the Ministry of National Security, that is simply not so. We are applying the criteria I've outlined before and today, those who are outside long before, who made their applications a while ago, and the old, the elderly, those with children, those who had children born outside, those are the priority and they are coming back. So anyone who is telling persons, join them, they have a way to get a quicker access, that is not so. As I've said before, taking us to court, the pre-action protocols, those matters are being defeated time and time again because the court recognizes that we have a proper criteria being applied and we will continue to apply that. And we are moving into another phase of speeding that up. We are going to be giving the instructions that those in the far-off jurisdictions, we still have some nationals in India, some in Japan, etc., they are going to be granted the exemptions. They'll make their way back, and we will find ways to accommodate them to get in. So this is where we are at now. Fortunately, we're moving, and we're going to be speeding up the process and trying and getting more back, more of our nationals back as quickly as possible. But with the priority being those who have been stuck outside for a lot longer periods, and we're going through that queue process to bring persons back. Also those who continue to use the mischief, because we are aware of it, of tricking, I'll use that word, persons that they have some way or they have chartered flights. That is simply not so. Continue to stick with the process. The process has speeded up. As we've seen, almost 2,000 in the last month repatriated to Trinidad and Tobago, and we will continue that process, Prime Minister.
Thank you. As we analyze our days and weeks ahead, there are three developments facing us in the coming weeks that we are cognizant of. One, next month we have Halloween. Is it this month? Yeah. Tell that to a Tobagonian, right? Yeah, you have to excuse me. I was not brought up with Halloween. But I represent Diego Martin West, so I learn as I go along. So we have Halloween where people get together to party and children get out in groups to have Halloween activity. We want to make sure that we are aware of what is happening there, and parents and children and communities are to be aware that these activities may need to be closely supervised and determined in such a way that they don't add to any threat that we are facing, and they do not reverse any gain that we have made. After that, we have Diwali. That's another gathering event, and we are hoping that by the time these events come around, that our level would be so low that the risk would allow some kind of participation, but not participation that exposes us to a turnaround. But it's on the cards. I'm just putting it out there. And then, of course, we have Christmas. The worst Christmas that we can possibly have is a Christmas where we're being overwhelmed by COVID. And, of course, the Christmas season starts mid-November, where gatherings and expressions and partying and all that. But we are hoping that we can sacrifices we're making now will put us in a position that we can very cautiously acknowledge these three events without allowing these events to become seasons of spikes and turnarounds. So I just put that on the cards. And that's one of the reasons why we are working so hard and so committedly to bring the numbers down now so that we don't go into those seasons with high numbers and rapid community spread. Could we have questions now? If you have any questions, we'll take them now. And Minister Young, if you have questions to Minister Young, you will join us if you're called upon. Okay, so we start with Minister Young. Please put your questions.
Yes, sir. We had mentioned of people tricking others in the community. Any investigation?
Well, I mean, really, we're not going to waste resources having any investigations, right? I mean, we've had certain instances. Fortunately, Trinidadians are sensible people, and by now they would have seen that certain people are misleading them, and I dare say there's also a political spin and element in that on some of these group chats. We have had other instances where I believe there have been actions brought against persons. That is outside of the scope of the government, so we're not concerning ourselves with it. I just want people to be cautious. We had a bit of a scare about a month ago when information came to me that there were persons at the Ministry of National Security who were being bribed or selling that they could get exemptions. It fortunately turned out to be completely untrue. And what it was a private sector person charging people $1,500 US and telling them there was a way for them to get back in. And of course, there was no truth to that whatsoever. But at this stage, there's no need for any investigation.
Are there any breaches of the law with regards to these people tricking citizens?
Well, I mean, some of it is taking place outside of Trinidad and Tobago. It's not inside Trinidad and Tobago. If we see any instances of it, believe you me, we will take the necessary action and get the law enforcement authorities involved.
My last question for you is, do you have a number of the amount of requests we have for returning citizens?
As I say, what I've found is a very strange phenomenon. It is going up at times rather than going down, even though, as you've heard me say, we've brought home nearly 2,000 in the last month. So right now, the latest figure I got this afternoon of outstanding applications for persons to return to Trinidad and Tobago, 7,000, approximately 7,100. But what I can tell you, because we now categorize it, there are a lot of persons in there with dual, I don't have the breakdown, but with dual citizenship. Other persons we're seeing, they say, look, they've lost their jobs, for example, pilots who were out in the Middle East flying for Etihad and UAE and some of these airlines. They now want to make their way back. Persons in oil and gas, other persons in the United States who may have lost their jobs and they want to return to Trinidad and Tobago. Because you would remember at the start, it was a figure that was around that same figure, and we've brought back, as you've heard, over 5,000 people. And it's still there, so we continue to have those additions.
Now may be a good time for me to remind you that over and above those persons who were in transit and were caught outside by the sudden announcement of the border closure, persons who were normally domiciled in Trinidad and Tobago, over and above those persons, which are a few thousand, we have over 330,000 people outside in the United States mainly. I think there are 250,000 of them are in the United States, and another chunk, 75,000, are in the United Kingdom, who regard Trinidad and Tobago as home. So COVID or no COVID, you had this block of people who have access to claiming Trinidad and Tobago as home. And of course, you could imagine, as long as the borders are closed, and the borders are closed now and will remain closed for a little while longer, as long as the borders are closed and we're using this exemption system, this control system, and the control is only in place, control not for people moving, but for management of the virus and its population coming to us. As long as the borders are closed, there is going to be a stream of people wanting to come in and taxing the exemption system. So you could imagine, if that system is still in existence, getting down to Christmas, I'm absolutely sure that there will be a large number of Trinidad and Tobago citizens who normally are outside, who would want to come home, if only for Christmas. They haven't seen their family for a long time. And in in many instances as well, circumstances abroad are such that it's having a push effect on some of our citizens who normally would have been spending their time in countries outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Any country, not just one country. Where the numbers are larger, the expectation is that more persons from those areas will want to come to us. And by the Caribbean, then you have people in the Caribbean islands, people in the Middle East, people in South America, and we're expecting that as long as the borders are closed and we are having to grant exemptions until we have scheduled flights where people can handle their own storage themselves with airlines without government involvement, that you're going to have the management of this issue. Unfortunately, it's not all smooth sailing, because some people will see opportunities there either for misbehavior, political mischief, or just impatience. It's one of the outcomes of the pandemic management, but as long as we are here now, that's going to be the norm for a little while longer. We are hoping that the first break that's going to happen in this situation is when we are able to begin cautiously to have scheduled flights. But we can't have that right now because we are still, as a matter of policy, maintaining control through quarantine, both state control and home quarantine. As long as that is still our response in the country, we have to do some control as to how many we can take in at once, how many facilities we have, and as Mr. Minister Young just pointed out, because we have not had a big pressure on the hospital system requiring the step down and so on, we have more room available for the quarantining of transients. And therefore, it's improving, but it's going to be with us for a little while longer. But I'm hoping that by the time we get to the Christmas situation, we would have broken the back of it, especially for those who were just caught inadvertently. And then we'd only be dealing with those who want to come home. And we will then be able to allow many more people to come home and to be with their families, at least for Diwali and Christmas and so on as we go forward.
Because Minister Young, one of my questions now would have been, we're seeing the control of flights, but we're not opening back our borders. And that is another question that persons wanting to know, how soon can we get flights going? But I mean, with that control now in place.
Well, as you've seen, and I mean, there has been an increase and an uptick in the number of flights. So, whereas before we had a clamoring, you all would have recalled, for example, students who wanted to get back to school being one of the groups that were saying they needed flights. You're not hearing that conversation anymore. And in fact, we're seeing it in the numbers, as you would have seen when I just said you have 2,000 coming in as compared to 977 leaving. So those have provided. So for example, we had foreign governments at one time asking us for permission for flights for their nationals to go. And I'll use Canada as an example. They told us this week there was no longer a need for them to put those flights on because our flight next week their nationals can get on. And as the Prime Minister said, and as he's instructed, we are now trying to schedule these in accordance with the room that we have in facilities. Unfortunately, we have more room, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Ministry of Health personnel and also those in national security who have been carrying this load. Part of the additional facilities we have now available, Prime Minister, as well, are from the University of the West Indies. We're using both day bay, and they've now given us, and it's available, some almost 200 plus rooms at St. Augustine. So that helps us tremendously, and we are going to make the most use of it.